So I've been teaching at WCC since 2012, mainly teaching psychology and human services courses. But in addition to working as an adjunct instructor, I work as a licensed professional counselor, and I mainly see college age students here in the Ann Arbor community. But we're going to spend today's webinar talking more about racial microaggressions. And I think it's easy for us to see more of these obvious forms of racism, such as like a racial slur or a threat. But what about these more subtle forms? So we're going to spend some time defining what a microaggression actually is, because these are statements or behaviors that can intentionally or unintentionally communicate a negative message about a non-dominant group. And given the subtle nature of these microaggressions, they can have a significant impact on the lives of Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. And these messages may be sent verbally, so a statement such as, "Oh, you speak good English," or non-verbally, such as a woman clutching her purse a little bit tighter, or even environmentally. So think of some of the symbols of the statues that we see around, or the display of the Confederate flag, or certain mascots that are used to represent American Indians. So we're going to look more at microaggressions, and just keep in mind that microaggressions occur for a lot of people and various oppressed or certain target groups. So microaggressions can occur if you're a part of the LGBTQIA plus community, or if you're a woman, or if you're a person with a disability, or if you're a religious minority. But for today's webinar, we're going to focus more on racial microaggressions. And we can take a closer look at what we can do if you've ever been the target of a microaggression, or if you've been a bystander, or if you're the microaggressor. But I want to go over my ground rules before we begin this discussion together. So first, I want us just to establish a sense of safety around these conversations, especially around race or this topic of microaggressions today, because it's important to recognize that some people have experiences that are challenging to talk about just based off their race. So it's important just to model this sense of safety as we discuss these experiences, as some people may have experienced painful moments in their own personal narratives. Next is just a responsibility. So it's crucial for us to take an active role in our own learning and our interactions here today and in the future. So I really pose the challenge of using just I statements to ensure you're speaking for yourself and not speaking for others or speaking for all people. And the next is just respect. So it's key for these types of spaces just to be respectful, be kind, and be polite with how we're interacting with each other. And then lastly, I wanted to talk more about just this is more of an interactive space for us to have an interactive dialogue as best as we can. So I really encourage you to use the unmute button to speak up, or to find the chat bubble just to write a comment as I'm going through today's webinar. And then a background on my teaching style, I really value interaction. So I don't like to be on this pedestal as the instructor and my students down here, because we all are vessels of knowledge and experiences. So this is just a space for us to collaborate together and just to exchange ideas, or to exchange our experiences, our knowledge, and expertise. But I wanted to talk more about what what a racial microaggression actually refers to. So these are unintended slights that make a person feel uncomfortable, underestimated, or undervalued, just strictly based off the color of their skin. And these brief slights can occur just in everyday life. And like we talked about how these messages they can be sent verbally, non-verbally, or environmentally. So this is more of a background of how we define a racial microaggression. But I want us to kind of walk through a real life example of these racial microaggressions and just the magnitude of what it's like to carry this with you. And keep in mind that these can be very slight, so they can be unintended. But think of the effect when you experience an accumulation of microaggressions. And racial microaggressions, they occur in everyday life. So we're going to walk through a fictitious scenario. And I just chose, and let's just say this fictitious identity is an African American male, a college age student who attends some fictitious university. And as he walks throughout his day, I want us just to envision what type of microaggressions this person is likely to experience and how they can be verbally, non-verbally, or environmentally. And as this individual walks throughout their day, just notice what could be the underlying hidden message that really plays into this larger system of racism. So take for instance this first experience. So let's say he lives in a public apartment and he walks out of his residence, and the first thing he notices as he walks through a shared parking lot, a neighbor locks the door instantly the minute he walks by their car. Or let's say he continues to walk throughout his day and he's walking on a public street and he notices the same occurrence occur. The minute he walks by this person's car door, they lock their door instantly. And as this person experiences this, like what is the hidden message? Does anyone want to share? And you're more than welcome to speak up or you can type it.
I think that good afternoon, everyone. This is Brian. I think the hidden message is that they feel threatened by this
Yeah.
individual and that he is dangerous and probably basing those things on um, experiences or ideas that they haven't actually undergone or experienced themselves. So
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I see other people putting in the comment, there's this fear of going to get robbed, going to get mugged. And so it's helpful to recognize this theme of criminality that we see, or this fear just being perceived as a threat, strictly based off the color of his skin and how it perpetuates this larger system about racism. I'm sorry, does someone else have another point to say?
Well, I do. I'm a black female, and my natural instinct would have been to lock my car doors as well.
Yeah, and we're not immune to this system at play. When we think of how often we see the perpetuation of African American males in particular associated with criminality, like we're not immune to seeing these messages portrayed in our society. And let's say the same individual is walking throughout, or this is a student going into a public elevator. And the minute this person walks onto the elevator, he notices a woman clutch her purse a little bit tighter. And it's nonverbal, so nothing was verbally stated, but still in this instance, this gentleman may think to himself, did she clutch her purse tighter because she's trying to feel her phone vibrate? Or did she do this because she assumes I'm going to steal her purse? So again, what is this hidden message that we see? So just a general occurrence of a person walking on the elevator and it still perpetuates this idea of criminality in a way. So still walking through this individual's day, they are at this fictitious university. And as the student enters their college, they notice all the faculty a part of their department that they're a student a part of. They notice that it's very homogenous, that there's no one that looks like them in this position as a faculty member or in this role. And due to this, what do you think the hidden message could be?
That only white people are capable of teaching.
Yeah. So that could be one analysis, that only people that are white can teach or have this acclaimed role as a faculty member, or another person competent to stay in your place. Mhm. And when we think about this, this is another nonverbal type of message. Another person mentioned that I don't belong here. So think about this interaction. So this is just a person walking throughout their day and they see these nonverbal slights, which could really lead them to question their self in a way. Like people are saying that I don't belong here or I need to stay in my place. And let's say this fictitious student is in a classroom. So maybe this is week 5 or so. So you've developed more of an acquaintance or friend with a classmate. And this particular classmate makes a comment that, oh, you're not like the other Black people I know. Like you speak well. What is the hidden message in this statement?
Is there a hidden message in that statement?
Mm.
Is there really a hidden message there?
Tell me more.
You are not
You think
like
it's more
the other
blatant?
Black people I know. You speak well. I don't think there's anything hidden about that statement.
Mhm.
Any?
Yeah, and as the microaggressor, you may not be aware that it's a slight or it's an insult. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
It
as the microaggressor, you may not be even aware that the comment you said was offensive
Right.
or
Right.
hurtful.
Yes, I understand that.
Mhm. And tell me if you don't mind sharing, like, what is the overarching message if a person were to make a statement such as that? Oh, I hear someone typing the stereotype is of Ebonics.
That most Black people do not speak like white people.
I
So
think that
black.
I
Oh,
also
okay.
think that the hidden message, in addition to that, is that most Black people don't speak well, or a lot of people equate being able to speak well with intelligence. So
Mm.
people think if you can't speak well, then you're unintelligent, which in turn implies that that he thinks that most Black people are not intelligent. So
Yeah,
I think it kind of reaches is far reaching.
absolutely. So if we think about just the association from even the early faulty science that made the assumption that blacks had smaller brains than whites, like there's this assumption of unintelligence just based off how you're speaking, which it's the microaggressor may not be aware that that statement is offensive, but it's so ingrained in our larger system that making or hearing a verbal statement like that can be very offensive. Even if we look at when President Barack Obama was our president, people would make comments like he's very articulate or he speaks very well, which those are other examples of these microaggressions, that it's not the norm to speak, um, I don't know, with using big words or speaking in an intellectual manner.
It also seems to be sending the message, the unspoken message, that what it means to speak well is to speak white.
Yeah. Yeah, and think about just the power of that statement. So you don't speak like white people. So we're equating white with goodness or what's right. which is another form of this system of microaggression, or just the larger system of racism. Because if you were to challenge someone, we say, well, what does it mean to speak white? Well, what does that even mean?
I think it also implies that Black English is not a grammatical form of the language.
hmm And we talk about with language, like there's a spectrum of languages here in this entire world. So who's to say that one is better than the other? Like who's to make these conclusions or realizations? So let's say later in the day, the same individual was invited to a party with other college students. And at this particular party, they were just one of the individuals stated, "Oh, well, what sport do you play?" Like, that's the first question they would ask this individual. And this is just, let's say, a fictitious four-year university. And the first question that a person you're just meeting would ask is just making the assumption of, "Oh, what sport do you play to pretty much go to this university?" What would be the hidden message?
That you're not smart enough to get in on academics, that you have to get in on an actual scholarship.
Yeah. So this is another example of a microaggression based off the ascription of intelligence, that it's a verbal statement.
But on the other hand, if he was 6'9", maybe I would ask him if he played basketball.
Yeah, and I mean that's a common occurrence if we see anyone that's an anomaly or super tall, that we would make the assumption that they play a sport. But can we generalize and say that all tall people play sports?
No, of course not.
Yeah. Yeah, so microaggressions happen. So we're not saying that it's just based off our experiences or what we pick up off our observations or what's ingrained to us from a societal standpoint. And just the last one for this particular walkthrough for the day in the life of this individual. So think about maybe the next day, this individual is describing their experiences that they went through with another acquaintance or another friend. And as you're describing each of these occurrences, your friend or acquaintance is saying, "Oh, stop being so sensitive. Not everything is about race. Like there's only one race, the human race." So what is the hidden message when you have these types of interactions?
That their experiences aren't valid or aren't valued as others maybe.
Yeah, so it can be completely invalidating to tell someone that they're oversensitive or that they're paranoid in that way. And they and that you as a person of color are misinterpreting the situation. And like you said, it's very invalidating. And think about just these are small occurrences, like we talked about, that they could be verbal statements, nonverbal, or just things that we observe in our environment that could have an effect on like how we experience the world. And it's good to know that microaggressions, they happen, like they exist. Like I've been guilty of committing microaggressions before. So it's important to recognize that they happen and we can think of ways to remedy the situation or just to learn from those experiences. And I wanted to talk more about why it's important for us to be aware of these microaggressions. And I also want to talk about something that's I'm noticing just present right now in our society is I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the, the Black Lives Matter movement and hearing people counter that with all lives matter. And when we think about the origins of the Black Lives Matter movement, it's a human rights movement just calling for the end of violence or systemic racism toward Black people. And the movement is in no shape or form meant to imply that other lives don't matter. It's just stating that all lives will matter once Black lives matter. And when we use phrases like all lives matter, you're saying that there's no racial disparities in our society or here in America, in the US. So the Black Lives Matter movement can really help to bring attention to the fact that there's a legitimate issue happening in the Black community. And this could be another example of a microaggression when we hear someone counter the Black Lives Movement by hashtag all lives matter, a statement such as that. And think of what is any other hidden messages you see when you see a statement like all lives matter?
Mm. Back to the invalidation of the experience. All lives matter, but not everyone in the world is targeted by the police perhaps as much.
Yeah, absolutely. So it invalidates the experiences. If all lives matter, then we would all seek out to be aware that there's injustices happening for this particular group. Others say it just means to get over it, that other people are also going through life. Yeah, so it's important to see that just seeing a statement or comment like this can be quite distressing, given the fact that you're right, it invalidates experiences. And microaggressions happen, like I mentioned, and they can occur based off race, your gender, your age, your sexual orientation. And microaggressions, they can come from strangers, they can come from your coworkers, acquaintances, or just personal friends. So it's helpful for us to just be aware that they do occur. And one study looked at UCLA. They observed about 30%. They observed about a third of the 60 community college classrooms that they were observing. They witnessed or observed microaggressions occurring in classrooms, mainly as the instructors being the microaggressors. So it's good for us to just know that these occur in various spheres. So with jobs, within schools, within our employment, just day-to-day interactions. So they exist. And it's good for us to take a look at the impact of these racial microaggressions. So microaggressions, they can have a harmful and lasting psychological impact that may endure for days, weeks, months, and even years. And common themes we tend to see among racial microaggressions include like the ascription of intelligence or being an alien in your own land. So a person asking like, what are you? Or where are you from? No, where are you really from when you say? Or others could include just denying of the racial reality and not being aware that these racial disparities exist. Another one we see is just the assumption of criminality. Those are some of the common themes of microaggressions we tend to see. But there's also a cognitive, behavioral, and emotional impact that can occur from experiencing these microaggressions. So, from a cognitive level, knowing that these, as a target of a microaggression, knowing that they're very subtle, it leads you to have your own inner dialogue, to think to yourself, did this really occur? Or may lead you to think like, should I speak or should I not speak up? From a behavioral standpoint, we see that it leads a person maybe to shift how they interact with others to ensure that they are going to be perceived in a positive light. So this could lead to us shifting the way that we talk or shifting our appearance in a way to make a person maybe look less threatening or not fall into any of the stereotypes. From an emotional standpoint, when you experience these microaggressions, one study looked at participants were likely to report feeling a lot of anger, frustration, doubt, guilt, or sadness. And when they experienced these microaggressions, they noted that the emotional turmoil just stayed with them much longer, even as they tried to make sense of the incident. Another study looked by Dr. Kevin Nadal reported that the more racial microaggressions that Black, Indigenous, or people of color experience, the more likely they are to report depressive symptoms or just to have a negative outlook of the world. So it's good to know that these subtle forms of racism that we see still has a major impact on the lives of individuals. And knowing that they happen and that they exist, it's good for us to examine what we can do if we were ever the target of a microaggression. And if we're ever if we're a bystander or if we are the microaggressor. So we're going to start by being able to take a look at the experiences if you were a target of a microaggression. And we can take a look at what we can do in these situations. So like I mentioned, we'll start with the target. So experiencing a microaggression can be very painful. And it's almost this twofold approach that can occur for us, where we have to acknowledge the internal impacts, which could mean us just focusing on our survival or just prioritizing self-care. And then also thinking from an external standpoint, which means us or the person that experienced the microaggression confronting the source. So confronting the perpetrator. We're going to look at the work of Dr. Gerald Su, who is a clinical psychologist who studies microaggressions. And I do have a link, or not a link, but a resource at the end of the webinar if you'd like to learn more about his work. But Dr. Su developed a series of 3 questions to ask ourselves to assist us with how we would react to a microaggression. At first, you just may question, like, did this really just happen to me? And sometimes they can be quite obvious. So if you think that instance of the woman clutching her purse a little bit tighter, if this happened like over 100 times, it leads you to be aware that like I'm not like this is really happening in this particular moment, that a microaggression may have occurred. And it's important for us to seek out support. And it's especially if we are around people that we can trust, just being able to process what occurred and just get that validity of being the validity to know that I did experience this microaggression can be really beneficial for us. Because we talked about that it's very harmful just for us to hold on to it and knowing some of the negative consequences on our mental health after experiencing a series of microaggressions. The next question really to ask yourself is, should I respond to this microaggression? So if you as an individual are certain or even moderately certain that a microaggression did in fact occur, it's still important for us to weigh the potential risk or consequences of responding or not responding. And some questions to ask yourself is, if I respond, could my physical safety be in danger? If I respond, will this person become defensive? And will this lead to an argument? And if I respond, like, how will this affect my relationship with this person? Is this person a coworker, a family member, or a stranger? And then to weigh, if I don't respond, will I regret not saying something? Or if I don't respond, does that convey that I accept the behavior of the statement? So these are very important things to consider with like how I should respond to the particular microaggression. And next is just how should I respond to this microaggression? So if you do decide to take action, it's important to consider like how I'm going to take action. So some people may respond in more of a passive aggressive way. So by making a joke or just saying some sarcastic comment, having the undertone of being annoyed or even irritated. Or you may just roll your eyes or give a sigh. Like these are just some ways that people have responded to microaggressions. Others may take the time to talk it over with that person just to engage with that particular perpetrator. Or some just decide like, to do nothing. So there's a lot of alternatives of how you can respond in these situations. And sometimes, as a target of a microaggression, you don't have the energy to engage in a full conversation with the perpetrator. So that's a choice like you get to decide. So some individuals may wait to talk it over with the loved one or talk it over with a friend before you engage with the perpetrator. And for some, it may be therapeutic just to kind of release these years of accumulated anger or frustration. Some people may yell. Like these are common reactions of how people cope with microaggressions. And others can react in more of an assertive way. So this can include just calmly addressing the perpetrator and just by really explaining how the situation made you feel. And this interaction may consist of educating the perpetrator and be aware that since they're so subtle, the perpetrator may become defensive, which could lead to other microaggressions of a person saying, oh, you're being too sensitive. Not everything's about race. So it's crucial to use I statements, like I feel offended or I feel hurt when you said X, Y, and Z. So being able to really address the behavior and not the perpetrator. Because think of what happens the minute you just call out to the perpetrator, oh, you're a racist. Like that puts someone right on defense. So it's good to attack the behavior versus the perpetrator. And just to pretty much explain or convey the idea that whatever the person said was very racially charged or offensive, and use that as a moment to enlighten that person. And no matter what course of action you decide to take when experiencing a microaggression, there's so much research talking about the benefit of us seeking out support. And seeking out support can mean a lot of things. It could mean you reaching out to your HR department to report a consistent complaint, or it could mean just talking it over with a loved one to process more of the emotional aspect of experiencing a microaggression or multiple microaggressions in your day-to-day life. And knowing the emotional toll, like it may be necessary sometimes just to seek out to talk with a mental health professional. Just because we discussed earlier that experiencing microaggressions can lead to depressive symptoms, but also anxiety and just traumatic stress. And this is just another quick way to summarize just what I just shared with you. So, of course, the first action is just to take care of yourself and maybe seek support to just process what you went through. Being able to respond in a way that seems fit for the interaction, and that's more individually based. And being sure to address the microaggression, not the microaggressor. And you always have the option not to respond. So there's no perfect one way to respond to these situations. So if we go back to one of the scenarios from earlier in our webinar, think about this occurrence happening. So where the gentleman was talking with an acquaintance or a classmate, and the classmate stated, "Oh, you're not like the other Black people. I know you speak well." The first question you would ask yourself is, did the microaggression occur? And we've kind of had the discussion to say that yes, a microaggression did occur. But step two, and I'm more than open, you could type in the chat box or unmute yourself and think about this situation of, should I respond to this occurrence? So if we think of this first question, you can type yes or no, or you can speak up. But if the student, the African American male student, were to respond to this classmate, if we just envision or imagine, like, could their physical safety be at risk in any way? And this is a question just to think and reflect about, and to kind of gauge the temperature of the room. What is the climate like in that particular classroom where you would feel supported in speaking up against the microaggressor? The next question, if I respond, will this person become defensive, or will this lead to an argument? So take a minute to reflect on this scenario here and think about what could be the rebuttal of, if you were to respond to this microaggression, what could a person say? And anyone could just give out any example.
Most people don't like their behavior corrected,
Yeah, no, that's the honest reality of it. Hmm.
especially if when someone they consider to be a peer.
Hmm.
I have a comment, and that is that you seem to be discussing direct interpersonal relationships. But as an educator, I'm also facing a racist environment. And I recall a couple of decades ago when students were permitted to graduate from high school without correction of their speech. And what we found, much to our regret thereafter, is that we had a harder time finding work placements for these people. I've talked and, discussed this with a lot of people, but it's really a very difficult situation. So yes, interpersonally, I see what you're saying, and I agree 100%. But what, as an educator thinking about the person's future in a racist society, should I do?
Yeah, and I get what your take is. And I think it's still important for us to be aware of that there are still certain standards when it comes to, I don't know how you describe, like, just when it comes to performance or aptitude. So there's things to be aware of, and I feel that we shouldn't, be a better way of saying this. I think it's important to be aware that there's the larger macro system at play of
Yes.
racism, and to acknowledge that, but we shouldn't be so quick to ascribe certain races as being classified as unintelligent, or this is the
Yeah.
intelligent group.
I agree 100% with
Yeah.
what you're saying. It just that there is that additional dimension of, as an educator, how do I best support the students that I interact with?
Yeah. And I guess it just takes, which doing some research and having more understanding of how to meet the student halfway and still provide them with tools to be successful in the next chapter of their life. So I know that and it really just depends on what you're referring to, but I think that it's possible for us to seek out resources to provide students, despite your background, with tools to be successful.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when would be an example of a time you shouldn't speak out against a microaggression? Because, I mean, I am a white person, so I can't, of course, speak for anyone who is not white, but isn't not speaking up giving them the okay to keep going with that type of behavior?
No, and I appreciate you sharing that comment. So we're going to switch and talk more about bystanders after we finish talking about target. So hold on that comment though, and I'll definitely talk about that more in detail.
It's kind.
But thank you for sharing.
This is kind of a tricky microaggression too, because the white man may be thinking he's giving the black man a compliment. Hey,
Yeah, absolutely.
you're really you're more like me. This is great, you know. And then you slap him down, and he's going to be doubly offended.
Yeah, and this could be a time to educate someone. So it's one thing to say that this person, maybe make the compliment more specific. So talk about what he speaks well about. Like, is he talking about some concept in class, or make it specific to the situation, not to make it a blanket statement? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm a white woman, and I can remember shortly after I was hired at a university to teach, one of the men who hired me said, "Gee, Sheila, the reason we hired you is because of your beautiful legs, and you haven't worn a skirt since."
Wow.
And, I mean,
Yeah.
it's sort of like the same thing. You know, he's saying, "Oh, you have pretty legs. That's nice. That's a nice thing to
Mhm.
say." But on the other hand, what he's implying is, "We sure didn't hire you for your brains."
Absolutely. So you can see that these microaggressions, they happen and they can be etched in our mind, and we really have to assess the situation to decide if we're going to respond or not.
Yeah.
So if I don't respond, will I regret not saying something?
It's
And
interesting
if
because I've remembered that instance for 50 years.
Yeah, no, but I'm
Mm.
sure like they can be really etched in our memories in that way. And lastly, like if I don't respond, does it convey that I accept the behavior or the statement? And next is just how should I respond? So should I respond with a quick joke or sarcasm? Should I yell? Or should I calmly confront them with an I statement? Or we always talk about the value of just being able to seek out and get support. And if you had to think of this situation, if you were this African American male, like how would you respond? Does anyone have anything that they'd want to say?
Yes, I'm an African American woman, and I think in that situation, I would definitely want to confront them, but not in an aggressive manner, but like
Hmm.
you say, from the standpoint of educating them in regards to you know that's offensive, or why that's offensive.
Yeah,
Making
absolutely.
this statement that oh, so you're one of these black people who speak more intelligently, again,
Hmm.
the kudos. Oh, so I want to pat you on the back, without them not understanding, why is there any kind of assumptions made on how I speak, except that it is a general attitude that black people in general don't know how to speak intelligently. And really, you can make that same kind of microaggression to poor white people from
Mhm.
trailer, communities or the South or whatever, who don't speak quote unquote standard, educated English with the proper semantics and everything. So
Yeah.
that's really why I would calmly, educate them that, that's really not necessary to
Yeah.
even make those kind of remarks.
No,
What
and I
I have
appreciate you
done in
sharing. Oh, go ahead.
What I have done in the past is use the comment that Sheila made about her beautiful legs in a way to emphasize the inappropriateness of things. To give a very specific example, a male professor indicated that he was delighted we had no female head to any major committee. And I was the next to report on a major committee, and I'm female. And
Yeah.
so what I said, with due respect to Professor name, stop to let it sink in for a moment, and then I gave my report. And so I did not directly confront him with sarcasm jokes, yelling, etc. And I did say, with due respect to, and then just continued.
Hmm.
And I have
Yeah.
found that sort of strategy to work very, very well because it puts such a nice contrast in the situation.
Yeah, and I appreciate each of you just sharing those examples and just to call that there's no one right way to react to microaggressions. But
Sure.
it's really important for us to just be aware and accept that what a person may be feeling or thinking, it's valid. And to know that we each experience these microaggressions pretty much, they can occur like in our day-to-day life, like as we navigate these different spheres.
Hmm.
So it's really unique to you as an individual. But
Right.
as a,
Can I point out, I think also, sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah, did you want to make a quick comment?
Um, yeah, I'm just noticing in the comments that a lot of people had ideas for like questions you could ask, like what do you mean by that? What does speak well mean to you? Or it sounds like you think Black people in general don't talk very well. Do you mean that or something different? And I think that's a really interesting tactic because it forces the person to actually think about what they said.
Yeah, I really like that too, just being able to ask questions just to get clarity because clearly it's something that they aren't visibly able to be aware of. So getting more of a comprehension of where they're coming from could be a great tactic as well. No, thank you. But as a bystander can be anyone who becomes aware or witnesses these unjust behaviors or comments, and it leads to you feeling worthy enough to make a comment or to take some action related to that situation. And as an ally, like an ally has an evolved understanding of their own racial identity and awareness of themselves. And allies are more likely to be attuned to the dynamics of race and racism that can occur at work or in the classroom or any other setting. So, Dr. Nadal is another researcher who studies microaggressions, reported that it's really important for allies to know that sometimes their voices can be heard even more powerfully than the people directly affected by the microaggression. So when the target of a microaggression complains, the microaggressor may dismiss it and view them as being overly sensitive. So it doesn't mean you have to wear a badge saying, hello, I'm an ally. It just means to be aware of these interactions. But it's not important. It's not for you to speak on behalf of the person who's experienced the microaggression, since doing so itself could be another form of microaggression. So it's not as thinking that it's still important for you to speak up, but instead speak from your own experiences of, well, I'm offended to hear a comment such as that, or I'm hurt, or whatever other way, so that you're not directly speaking on behalf of the person who was the target of the microaggression. And if you were the microaggressor, so microaggressions, they happen. Like I've been guilty of using them, like I said, and just as I've been able to learn from these experiences. And just doing your own self-reflection, has there ever been a time where you've done or said something where an individual may have winced or just clearly reacted negatively? So we've all done it, or we've all said something that we may not have intended to offend someone, but somehow it still ended up doing so. So it's important for us just to be aware of our actions. And other times it takes another person to point it out for us to know that it was offensive or hurtful. However, when we are even slightly aware of it, that we've committed a microaggression, or if we're confronted about it, then there are things that we can do. But the important thing is that some people may be completely oblivious, like they have no recollection of committing a microaggression. But to begin, it's just important for us to disarm being defensive. So this is an easy tactic to just go in defense mode, but it takes a person to really take stock of the feelings and the thoughts and behaviors, and to really acknowledge that and not to minimize the situation if you are being confronted or made aware of a microaggression you may have committed. And keep in mind, it's still a risk for the person to speak up who's experienced the microaggression. So the worst thing you can do is just to invalidate their experience. So it's good for us to listen to what that individual is trying to tell us and to not get defensive. Next is just acknowledgement. So it's important for us to acknowledge the other person's hurt and just to apologize or reflect on where the microaggression came from and like how we can avoid this microaggression or avoid a similar mistake in the future. And this really takes the responsibility on us to just increase our understanding of our own privileges and be aware of the prejudice that exists in our society and just to own up to it. Like we all make mistakes, consciously or not. So it's good for us to know that we can own up to what we did and kind of learn from these experiences. And finally, just education about microaggressions is important. So the more people spend just learning more about the term and the concept, the better able we are to be aware and not jump on defense the minute we maybe commit a microaggression. And then I always like to just start young. So teaching your kids more about diversity or teaching kids that you're around about diversity and equality, just starting at a very young age can help to transform and lead to more of a open-minded adult. And just teaching kids not to be afraid, but rather just to respect each other, as we are aware that these microaggressions occur and exist in everyday life. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Dr. Daryl Sue's work. So he provides more of a constructive tools and suggestions of how to make our society free of microaggressions. And some of his work looks at microaggressions that can occur based off race and gender and sexual orientation. So I encourage you just to research more of his literature. And I just provided some resources or the research articles from some of the content that I discussed in today's webinar. And knowing my background's more in psychology, so I'm a lot of times looking more at the literature on the literature related to psychology. I know we're almost out of time though, but if anyone has any quick reflections or questions that we could talk about briefly? Or I can just go back through the comments and see if I missed anything.
I have a quick question, Christina. Where can I find like the recordings of these meetings that we've attended since July 1st?
And let me see if Shelley, do you mind answering that
Sure,
question?
absolutely. So
Yeah.
we have our IT department adding closed caption so that they're accessible to more people. So as soon as they are done with the closed caption, it will be emailed to anyone who is registered.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, not
Yeah,
a
no
problem.
problem.
Yeah, and I appreciate each of you just taking your time to attend this webinar this afternoon. And I know I will have another webinar this Friday at 2 p.m. And that webinar will focus more on the race-related stress and just how to cope with that and how to take action. But thank you so much for everyone who did participate and just for sharing your input and your experiences. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.